I'm Karma Kitaj. I'm your host for A Livelihood. And today I have David Weinberg with us, and he's going to talk to us about his journey, his transition from being a physician at one of the local Boston teaching hospitals to being a fine arts photographer. So, welcome, David.
Well, thank you for inviting me to your show.
I'm very happy to have you here. So, a few weeks ago, I interviewed your wife, Louise. And
yes, I think I saw that show.
You think you did, huh? Poured over every piece of it. So, she told me that her husband would be a good candidate for the show, and indeed, it seems that you are. So, we want to just talk a little bit about where you came from. And I know you were a pathologist, a physician at a local teaching hospital for many years.
About 30 years, yes.
30 years. And when you were doing that as a doctor, you had a number of different roles.
Well, throughout my career, I always wanted to keep changing and taking on different roles. So during that 30-year period, I actually did a few different jobs within that teaching hospital that could be viewed as career shifts even while staying in one place. So it varied quite a bit.
Quite different.
Very different. Everything from basic research to clinical work to doing managing laboratories and other types of things. And every few years I would find something new to do and some new way to shift my career. Kept it very interesting for me.
And I think you told me you also did some work in IT, right?
At the last part of my career there was spent in information technology. I was always one of those people who got into computers very early, had to have the latest toys, wanted to learn the newest technologies, and got very interested in computing. And that led to an interest in using computers to look at images. Since pathology is very oriented toward looking at images, I get very interested in using computer imaging to look at images, which led me to digital imaging, which led me to a stint in telemedicine, actually transmission of medical images over long distances. So one thing leads to another. And toward the end of my career at the hospital, I was managing an information technology group. I really did enjoy the time I spent there. But things change. This is the theme of your show. And after 30 years, I was in my mid-50s, and I felt that I had done about everything that I thought I might want to do in that environment. And I can't deny that Louise, shifting her career in midlife, yes, had a pretty profound impact on me. But I sort of continued with it, with just an amateur interest in photography. And then while I was mulling this over and thinking going to photography schools, a new program, I saw notice of a new program beginning out in Waltham. It was called the CDIA, Center for Digital Imaging Arts at Boston University. It's affiliated with Boston University. Brand new school, total emphasis on digital imaging, which I was very familiar with because I was using digital imaging a lot in my research at the time in the hospital, and realized that that's what I wanted to do. It was a fresh program with a wonderful faculty, lots of great equipment, new equipment, and it was a very intensive one-year program. So put together a portfolio, brought it out there, and enrolled.
So can you talk a little bit about the kinds of technical things that you learned when you went through the training program?
Well, the major tool for people doing digital photography these days is Photoshop. And I had taken adult ed courses in Photoshop and read manuals and taken occasional workshops at other meetings. And it is such a deep, complicated program that having 1 year where you're working with it every day and you're working with other people who are experts in it, who are kind of looking over your shoulder, who you can turn to in a moment and say, what am I doing wrong? How do I do this? Or showing all the tricks that you don't find in instructional manuals and the shortcuts and special techniques. Those kinds of things are priceless, and having that concentrated period of time where you're at it every day is really invaluable. And to learn a major tool like that is just part and a necessary tool toward becoming a photographer. I think one of the aspects of the craft that I've had to cope with is that you have to be so familiar with your tools, your camera, your computer programs, etc., that they're really just extensions of you.
Like an arm and a leg or
You're not that aware of the technology, but you can call on it when you need it.
And I'm just remembering that when we talked earlier, David, you said that you see yourself as somebody who always likes to be learning.
Oh, yeah.
And it sounds like, from what you're describing, that photography is a craft.
It's a craft
in which you can always be learning.
You're always learning. And I don't mean just the technical side, because there is always something new to learn technically. But when I was in photography school, they would give us assignments, and I was really struck by those opportunities. I was given a chance to go to Suffolk Downs and photograph horse races at Suffolk Downs. I knew nothing about horse racing. And even in that one day, it just opened up a whole new world to me of things I knew formerly nothing about. And I think when you're working as a photographer, you meet people, you talk to people, you go to places you wouldn't normally go, you get an entree to places and an aspect of scenes that you wouldn't normally think of seeing. And it's just an endless learning experience. That's the joy of it for me.
Right. So it sounds like you're saying aside from the technical aspects of photography, that you're, kind of letting yourself be exposed to different experiences that you might never have done before.
Absolutely.
And I just want to mention, maybe show this book here called Homeless, which looks very interesting. I began to take a bit of a look at it, and we have a few pictures from your homeless shelter series, right?
Right.
That we can show here. And can you talk a little bit about what that was like for you? I understand you volunteer there at the shelter.
That stemmed from a volunteer effort I was making with United Way in Boston, who had introduced me to this particular group in Cambridge. At that time they were called Shelter Inc. Now they're known as Heading Home, and they create housing solutions for the homeless in the greater Boston area. And I got to know them through my work with United Way and felt it was a marvelous agency, and realized that it was an issue I knew very little about. I had the same stereotypic images of the homeless that most people do, of the people you see on the street, panhandlers, people sleeping indoors. There's so much more to it, and there's a much bigger population of homeless people, families, individuals, children, women, men. And it's an enormous problem. So as I became interested in it, I realized, now that I was thinking of myself as a photographer, that what I could offer this agency was my efforts as a photographer.
Now, you also have provided us with some of your earlier series.
Right. I think the first series of images that you'll show will be from work that I've done in Hollywood, Florida. Not Hollywood, California, but Hollywood Beach, Florida. Stayed there by accident because I couldn't get a room in Fort Lauderdale, and Louise and I stayed in Hollywood and found it to be a wonderful, funky kind of place. This is back in 2006. That reminded me very much of Atlantic City, that I used to visit quite often growing up in Philadelphia. Atlantic City was a very common vacation spot. And they had an area called the Broadwalk, which was a mimicry of the boardwalk in Atlantic City, with a lot of shops and stores and a very interesting mix of people, and a lot of kind of retro architecture that was in the process of being gentrified.
Right. And the last group of photos that we should talk about that you've also provided for us here, I think you refer to it as the self-portraits?
Self-portraits, yes.
Yeah.
And I think
that's your most recent?
That's the most recent work, and it's an ongoing project. And part of the work I'm doing jointly with Louise, so we are doing some collaborative work on this. And
so some of the pictures that you're showing us here are joint pictures?
There's one photograph. I think the last photograph that's shown, I think it's a self-portrait. I can't see it here, but it's a self-portrait with me wearing pears, a wreath of pears. I won't get into the meaning of that just now, but I'm not even sure myself. But That kind of project we're doing jointly is a combination of painting and photography.
Well, thank you so much, David. This has really been fascinating. I'm looking forward to looking more at this booklet here.
Oh, well, thank you.
Homeless.
Thank you. It's been
yeah.
a pleasure.